Hello everyone, welcome to another live stream video, podcast, whatever you want to call it, from Fantasy Football Scout. And we have potentially, and I say potentially, got some really good news about when the Premier League might start. I think at this point, we know it's going to come back. It's just a case of when. So myself and David are going to talk about that now. How are you doing, David?
Oh well, I'm great. This is exactly what we wanted. I mean, it's got to the point where we missed football so much that we'd almost kind of forgotten that it even existed. And to be honest, I'm just kind of happy that the limbo is over. The worst part, as I think many people have said about following football during this tough time, this challenging time for a lot of people, is just kind of not knowing when we're all going to kind of be getting back into the swing of things. So the promise of life returning to some semblance of normality is quite encouraging.
Yeah, I must admit, at this point, I'm looking forward to it. At first, lockdown was like, okay, fine, there's no football, and now I kind of really want it back. And obviously, there's still lots of stuff I'm sure for them to discuss and talk about. But we're gonna kind of go through all the latest news and stuff we've got so far. So let's kick off with the kind of it's not an official announcement, but a few different places, Telegraph, BBC, already all reporting the same start date, which is potentially going to be June 17th. I think there has been a meeting in the Premier League today. So do you know what kind of fixtures and stuff we're potentially looking at from this? Have you got that there?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, we have to sort of caveat with the fact the Premier League haven't announced this themselves, but with those reputable sources all basically reporting the same thing, we're just waiting for the Premier League to announce that this is what's going to happen. And yeah, so while we don't really know what the fixtures are going to look like long term, it does look as if we are going to have on Wednesday, the 17th of June, they're looking at having Aston Villa versus Sheffield United and Manchester City versus Arsenal, which those of you with memories long enough, because a lot of us have forgotten this, perhaps, that they were the outstanding fixtures from the League Cup final all the way back in February. And some of those fixtures were supposed to be played in the double game week that never was, game week 29. And so they're the games in hand for those four teams. So it looks like the plan is to get those games out of the way first so that they can go into the weekend of the 19th and 20th of June with every team in the whole division having played 29 games in total. Because a lot of people have been looking at how the season can complete. People have obviously been looking at eventualities where maybe the season doesn't complete. And obviously there's all sorts of problems with that because not every team had played the same number of matches. So could you conceivably get points per games or what have you? So personally, it's just my view. I think it's sort of very sensible for them to get these games in hand out of the way because it just leaves them with a stronger hand to kind of push forward, make sure everybody's on a level playing field as much as possible if we go into that first weekend with everybody having played the same amount of games. And we don't really know what it's going to look like beyond that, but it does look as if it's going to start with those four matches. A lot of talk already that with those four matches, it could be, theoretically speaking, it could be a double game week because the deadline could be for that Wednesday and then the weekend's matches will be attached to that. It could be a blank game week with just those four matches in one go. Oh, sorry, two matches, four teams in one go. I guess the bottom line from that really, and I guess we'll probably carry on talking about this in just a sec, is we still don't really know what this means for Fantasy Premier League. We know what it means for the Premier League. What it means for FPL, we're not sure yet in terms of deadlines and blanks and doubles. So that's what we need to look forward to next, I suppose.
Yeah, I can see some questions about that in the chat. One of them, I think it was Neil, said Premier League return is one thing, but FPL return is very much another thing. Are you certain that FPL will return? Obviously, we don't know that. I don't think anyone apart from FPL Towers would. But I just don't see how they don't return at this point. Like they made that announcement about the chips and how they'd be available. It didn't really say when it restarts, but they made a statement about the chips itself. Why would they do that if it wasn't going to restart? It just doesn't seem to me at this point that it won't. And then someone else saying, I hope it gets cancelled so I get my mini league cash back. I'm not sure anyone's worried about that apart from you. But yeah, no, I think it's going to restart. Obviously, we don't know. There's lots of speculation. Could there be unlimited transfers? Because obviously the dates are now going to be slightly rearranged potentially. And obviously people have been making transfers. For example, I've got rid of Aubameyang. He may now have a double game week. I've got rid of Henderson. He may now have a double game week as well. And obviously, I'm not saying they should do that just because I've made those transfers, but it's something they're probably going to have to consider. And once we get that info as well, we'll do another game. But I think this is probably the best way to do it, is get these fixtures out of the way, because they've got the beauty of when games get cancelled during the season, they have to put all this planning when to rearrange. They can do all that planning now beforehand, so it kind of makes sense to get them out of the way. In terms of like chip strategy and stuff, we'll have to wait until everything's kind of confirmed back. But I've already seen people kind of suggest, like, you could use a free hit here because there's potentially going to be no other double game weeks now apart from this one. So we'll have to wait and see on that. We'll just go through, obviously for that's kind of, there's not a huge amount more right now until we get an official date. But there's been some other news which kind of, I guess, points to the fact that this is going to come back at this point. It's not going to be, it's just a waiting game for the date, like I think you said earlier. So there was an announcement, I think you saw a few days ago now, that contact training is a thing as well. So is there much to kind of talk about with that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I think people obviously have to understand that so much of this return is going to be there's so many different things to consider at all levels of the sport, and the big one that's kind of made this particular decision take a little bit of a while to kind of I say announced. It hasn't been announced yet, but you might be watching this after it is announced. It is about the way that the players train, because obviously they've spent nearly 3 months not able to train with each other. The best competition that any Premier League player has faced in front of goal since March 13th is probably their kid or their wife, if they're married to someone who's blessed with the skills of football. So yeah, it's taken a little bit of time to ramp up towards full training, because of course, as we all know, the regulations still in the United Kingdom for everybody is to social distance where you can, stay 2 meters apart from anyone who's not from your household. Now, as far as I'm aware, they're not chucking all the Premier League players into one house as like Big Brother or something. So it does mean that they're having to kind of take steps to kind of verify that they're happy to put people together, and that takes a little bit of time to push through. I think last week they were able to get players back at the training facility, so I mean that's good because they can socially distance in the gym. So if anyone's put on a bit of weight, then they can hopefully get rid of it. But of course, that's not quite the same as actually kicking a ball to each other, and because really you do need to be able to play football. You've got to stand next to people, as we've seen with the Bundesliga. The way the game is played is still as it was before, but you've just got to get into that training. So they voted to go forward with the training being back to normal, but it does just take a little bit of time, because it was on your own. Then it was, I think, 2 to 3, but still socially distanced, and then it was 4 to 12. And then beyond that, it's the full squad. So I don't think any team is actually in a position to actually fully train yet, but they should be very soon. And then that period is what they'll have to work towards, as I said, June 17th. But most clubs will have till June 19th. And 20th. And to be honest, that kind of brings into consideration the other thing that I guess, I mean, it sounds silly to say the things that fantasy managers will have to consider, because of course in this whole thing, we appreciate that there are more important things than the fantasy football. But if you're someone who likes to keep an eye on the team news and who's fit and who isn't, we have to be looking at the fact that quite regularly, on a regular basis, Premier League players are going to be tested for COVID-19, and they've already started that particular process. I don't know how long it's going to go on for. I mean, I suppose in a sensible world, you want it to go on for as long as possible. But it looks like every player and every staff member of every club is going to be tested twice a week. We've had some results come through all that already, and they sound kind of encouraging, because it's not tons and tons of people who are testing positive, but it is just something that will impact whatever the future of Premier League football looks like, whether or not that's training or games themselves, because of course these people have to self-isolate for 7 days if they test positive. And of course, the UK government is trying to bring in I think it's the test, track and trace thing, where if you test positive, you then have to you basically pass on information to people you've been in contact with, and they have to self-isolate as well. And of course, if that happens after players start coming back to training, then people who may not even have COVID-19 may be self-isolating too. So there's all sorts of things up in the air. But as I said, the results that have come back from the initial tests have been quite positive.
Yeah,
Sorry, I've said that wrong. They've been
Yeah, yeah.
encouraging.
We
They
know
don't
what
want to
you
use the
meant.
P word.
I put them on the screen as you were talking about it. So the latest ones, which I got a tweet from David Ornstein, who's usually a really good kind of source as well. 4 positive results at 3 clubs from more than 1,000 samples, and that follows 2 positives from 2 clubs from 996 in round 2, and then 6 positives 3 clubs from 748 in round 1. So 12 positives in total from 2,744 tests, which sounds good. Obviously, we want that to be 0 and this whole thing over. But I guess in terms of how they can go about getting it restarted, this seems to be the best way so far. So we'll have to. I mean, again, from a fantasy point of view, it's I think you touched on it before we started streaming. Like, there is going to be like a new normal for this to consider, and this is something we're gonna have to watch out for. Whether there'll be press conferences and stuff, we just don't know. Obviously, some player will come on to Troy Deeney in a second. Obviously, some players have got concerns, and fairly so. I don't think anyone's kind of saying they have to come back and all that kind of stuff. And obviously it'll be up for the clubs to decide. I've seen Lampard and Kante are going to have talks and stuff like that. But I think just kind of one last thing about the players. I'll bring up the picture of Troy Deeney at least. But I think because he was kind of not against it, but he said he wasn't going to come back because obviously he was worried about his family. Again, completely fair to be thinking like that. But I think there's been a new quote from him now, has there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's worth saying that he seems more on board with coming back than before. My understanding is that he spoke to someone who's advising the government. I can't remember the name. It wasn't Chris Whitty. It was one of the others. And yeah, he seemed quite happy to come back. I'll just get the quote now. He was basically, the reason that he didn't come back initially was because his son, because I mean most people are concerned about their family anyway. Even though a lot of people have said that it doesn't really affect children as much as it does adults. The different situation with Troy's son was that he has had breathing problems in the past. So his son falls into that vulnerable category in the same way that, say, for example, my grandparents would as well. But yeah, in terms of, he basically said he was only going to not come back for the first week. So he basically said some people took. I mean, I'm not coming back at all, but that obviously wasn't the case. And he's basically said that he's had communication with the club and with some medical advisors about things that he wants in place so that he can feel safe. And the general gist of the quotes, which we've got on our website now on the main news story just about, is that he's relatively satisfied with what's being put in place to make sure that he can train and then also protect his family as well. But it just serves to, as you already said, as an example to, if we want to be taking this, if anyone wants to be taking this seriously, look at team news between now and the end of the season. These are the sorts of things that we're going to have to be looking at. Really, is situations where maybe people aren't even ill, but through sort of different circumstances in their own family life, don't feel comfortable, coming back. So definitely worth keeping an eye out for that. I mean, that's kind of the recurring theme of this whole video is we've got some new stuff, we've got some new information that we can talk about, but there's still loads of things we don't know. And we're obviously going to be trying to stay on top of that as best we can, but basically between now and the end of the season. And we'll just sort of take it as it comes. It's always good for us to know what we don't know, so we can keep an eye out for it, basically.
Yeah, I think we actually we spoke about it, one of the things actually on the Scoutcast on Tuesday, that there's, again, this is not confirmed or anything, but there's kind of speculation or rumours that they might introduce more substitutes. It might be 5 subs instead of the usual 3 and all that kind of thing. So there's going to be lots of stuff to think about, and obviously we'll be sure to kind of talk about that as and when we know more. I should say, before we kind of end this, David and Neil have already got up a kind of project restart page on Fantasy Football Scout, which I'll put in the link in the description below. So all the stuff that's already been written, and then that will be added to. So it's sort of like a guide, right? It's going to be a guide for what will now be pre-season, essentially.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, yeah, as you said, we've been working on this. This has been our lockdown labour of love of putting all of this together. And yeah, for anyone who follows us during the summer, you'll know that we do a big, massive page called Preseason page, which we like to think of as our Bible of just absolutely everything you need to know. And obviously, it's not going to be quite as detailed as it is in the preseason because we don't have any preseason friendlies, for example, to analyse. But we're basically using that as a hold-all space for you to just get to every piece of content that we're going to do in the build up to the start of the new season. There's already content on there already because, as people will know, been sticking with the site during lockdown, which of course we massively appreciate people doing that. We'll know that we've had plenty of articles on there already. all sorts of things that we've got going on there. So just to give you a few examples, we're going through every single Premier League squad, looking at some data that they recorded just before leading up to the suspension to work out who went into lockdown in the best form. Now, obviously, we caveat with the fact that maybe they're not going to come back in quite the same form, but it serves to know definitely which players were in the best form before they went in, and that's using members' data. So that's for members to look at. We're also looking at players who were injured going into that suspension, and in such a way that we figured they probably wouldn't come back. But with the change of the date, it means they probably will be able to come back in the season. So you're talking players like Marcus Rashford, Son Heung-min, Harry Kane, De La Feu, all sorts of players like that. We're going through and doing individual pieces on them as well. You mentioned obviously about some new changes maybe to the way that Premier League football is kind of structured. Anyone who's been watching the Bundesliga will know they've had to sort of tweak in terms of like who can go to games, because of course they're going to be behind closed doors. So we're going to be seeing if we can find any parallels from the Bundesliga, draw those into the Premier League, the impact of there being fans there or not fans there, etc., etc. When the fixtures arrive, we'll have full fixture analysis. At the moment, we've got an article there already just analysing the last 10 games as a block, which we did a few weeks ago. So you can head to that article, which I think is pinned under the featured, but you can also find it on the guide to see in that. It's quite a large block, admittedly, but we already know which teams have the fewest games left, for example, against the top 6, or who has the most, who's got the most games at home, etc. So plenty of fixture analysis there already. More to come when we actually have the fixtures themselves, because then we can start to look at it in more shorter term. And once we have those fixtures, we're going to do a positional guide as well. So we'll have an article on the best players in every position, looking at their form before lockdown and their fixtures coming up as well. So all sorts of content just to absolutely throw at you with everything coming back. We're already well underway with a lot of the stuff that we were working on during lockdown, because we didn't want to waste our time. So keep an eye out for that as it comes out in the next few days.
Yeah, good stuff. So if you didn't catch any of that, I will have the link in the description below. That was a lot of stuff to go through, but there's going to be a hell of a lot.
Sorry. There's loads of it. So yeah, I wanted to give it a push.
And then and we'll be doing the same video-wise. As soon as we've got a date, fixtures, and all that kind of stuff, we'll be plowing out the videos as well. So make sure to hit subscribe, hit like if you haven't already. Otherwise, I think we could probably leave it there, unless you've got anything else you wanted to add.
Oh, I don't think so. I think I've exhausted everything that we can possibly offer with what's on that Project Restart page. So head there, and that's all I'll say. Head there and read what we've done over lockdown, and keep an eye out for what else is to come.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. Obviously, quite an exciting time now. Again, I know it's not official announced date, but I think sometimes you get all these sources and they come together at the same time, and it does make it sound like it will be that day. Hopefully we'll get an announcement from the Premier League officially at some point, and then once we know for sure that FPL and stuff is coming back, which I'm confident, but obviously I don't know that it will. Like I said, the videos will be out, and obviously the content will be on the site as well. So make sure to check that out. Otherwise, I'll say goodbye to you, David.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Cheers, everyone. We'll catch you soon.